Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for our 30 on Thursday webinar, Self-Service BI Straight from SharePoint, Yes You Can. Just a little bit about Protiviti before we get started. We are a global consulting firm providing solutions to business problems in technology, business processes, analytics, transactions, and internal audit. Our full-service enterprise content management team provides SharePoint and Office 365 consulting, support, and training, and has helped hundreds of clients realize the value of SharePoint and Office 365. Our 30 on Thursday webinar series is a bi-weekly 30-minute webinar series where we talk all things SharePoint, Office 365, and ECM. We have two great webinars coming up in August talking about Office 365 and SharePoint taxonomy. If you're interested in registering for those two webinars and seeing our full event schedule, you can visit our website, ecm.protiviti.com. Our Protiviti On Demand team provides on-demand support for Office 365, SharePoint, Nintex, and much more. Our team can provide performance troubleshooting, system health checks, user experience, business intelligence, architecture and technical design, and so much more. If you're interested in a free 1-hour introductory consultation, you can schedule one today by emailing us at ecm@protiviti.com or visit our website to learn more. Today's session is being recorded. You can access the recording of today's session and see all of our past webinar recordings on our YouTube channel. For questions during today's presentation, please insert them in the question window of the GoToMeeting toolbar or live tweet us your questions using the hashtag 30TBI. We will be saving all of the questions until after the presentation today. Today's presenter is Brittany Kwait, Solutions Architect here at Protiviti, and I am Julia Marple, and I will be moderating today's session. All right, let's get started. Brittany, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Julia. All right, just a moment. I will bring up my screen. Are we good? Can you see? And can you hear me?
Yep.
Great, thank you so much. All right, thanks everyone for taking some time out of your Thursday to join me on this adventure through BI and SharePoint. We're going to do some fishing today. And let's start with a scenario. Let's pretend that you're a bear. And as a bear, you're hungry. What is it that you want to eat? You're thinking about fish. And you're thinking, I need to find some fish. How do I get the fish into my mouth? This is a challenge that you're facing every day. You're going out, you're looking for fish, you're finding fish, you're putting it in your mouth, but in maybe a dumb way. What if there was a way that you could start to gather some information about this that would improve your process of locating fish and finding the right types of fish to eat? Now, as this bear, you're smarter than the average bear, and you have an idea. So next time, we're going to go out on this little fishing adventure. Here we are, just caught some fish. It's a good day. Now, we go back to the office, and we're going to enter information about our catch that day into the computer, and you've set it up in SharePoint. Because SharePoint, rather than locking it in some file, is a way that you and all your other bear friends can start to collaborate on this data and determine together if you're seeing some patterns on maybe where the best fish are to catch, or where there's more fish, or where the fish are more meaty. So far, this is definitely an improvement over the old process of just wandering up to some stream and hoping that there are fish. Now you're full, but now you're also a little bit stuck. You have all of this information about the fish. You've collected where you got the fish, how many fish you caught, maybe if you didn't catch any fish that day, how many attempts you made. The problem now is how do I get knowledge? How do I take all of this information and start to see patterns in it that will help me to better feed myself and my family to feed themselves every day on the best fish that are out there? How do we make that connection between information and knowledge? So looking at this from the bear's perspective, we have a process which I have a really terrible name for. So contest out there, comment box if somebody has a better suggestion for this. This is data Warren. You'll see in just a minute. So first we're going to start with data. Data is just that collection of stuff that we're putting together. In this case, I've got a lot of different shapes that are kind of meaningless on their own. But now I can start to store them. And in order to store them, I have to find some commonalities between the data that's going to allow me to put them into buckets. So SharePoint is really strong at this. I'm going to take data and I'm going to create content types. I'm going to add metadata. I'm going to find a way of organizing what seems to be disparate information into something that can make sense, and then I can sort and add things where they need to go. And if I have something that doesn't fit, maybe try to find some commonalities or another place for it to go. So now I've got organized storage for my data. Now we go on to process or workflow. And often you've got that data, but you want to do something with it. Okay, you've got data and you stored it, but it's still useless if you don't do something with it. And this is where we have a process of cleaning data or approving data or recycling data. We're pushing it somewhere so that we can do more with it, or we send it somewhere else, or we combine it through some kind of process or workflow. This is how far we've gotten as the bear. We've collected some data, we've stored it on our SharePoint site. We have a process now of I go out to the stream, I have a day, take some statistics about my catch, I come back, enter it into the SharePoint site. Where I'm stuck now is my last step, the analysis. And this is where I want to start to see patterns or to find creative ways of organizing my data so that I can do something with it. What is it? What is this data telling me? It's gone through storage, it's been processed, and that's where a lot of my clients will drop off. That's an enormous step and certainly shouldn't be taken lightly. But now that you have all of this wonderful data, how do we turn it into knowledge? How do we do this analysis? So data Warren, depending if you are more workflow or process oriented, this is almost every SharePoint scenario, whether it's document storage or it's information storage or a combination thereof. And a lot of people will very lightly treat the analysis. So we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail today. So with the data, it's out there. It's just everywhere. And if we think about a SharePoint process, then we're using SharePoint, again, to store that. The process is typically going to be SharePoint Designer. You might have an enterprise workflow tool like Nintex, something that I'm a big fan of. You might have something else, or even some custom processes that are being done, or even just human workflow, totally acceptable as well. But when it comes to analysis, I think this is why there's a bit more of a drop-off, is there's no easy answer here. It's like, okay, I've gotten this far. SharePoint has given me all the tools that I need to get my data, to store it, and to process it. I'm not really given anything to do the analysis. If it's not in front of me, I'm not going to reach for it, and it might not happen, and then I just don't know where to go from here. Very common. So let's look at the options. Here are things that you can do on your own. It's a SharePoint list view, and this is where we take information, we change the filter, we change the sort, we change the grouping of the information in a way that gives us new insights about it, or a new way of organizing the information. So think of it as having a table in Excel that you've filtered or maybe grouped in a certain way to give you some subtotals. And there's actually a lot more limitations on this, as an aside, in Office 365 than there are on-prem or with the classic view. So your ability to do analysis with even SharePoint list views is pretty limited out of, well, I don't know if it's out of the box anymore, out of the farm with Office 365. Things that are a little bit more of a step in the advanced direction that maybe you can do, or you have someone on your team that can help you out with, but are certainly within the realm of possibility and ease and not turning it into a project. It's sending data out to Access, so you can run queries against it or make Access reports. Also JavaScript widgets. This is a really nice option. There are some libraries that you can download for JavaScript that plug into SharePoint. They're designed for that purpose, and you can do some pie charts, some bar charts. You can do some nice interface with something like data tables that will allow you to combine data sources. A little bit more advanced, but very accessible, all front-end data processing, and is a good option for some light analytics. Now we're going to go into these heavy hitters. This is where you're going to be looking at additional budget, probably additional resources at least to get these things up and running. They would be your SQL Server, that would be mobile reports, paginated reports, anything that's going to be on your reporting server tied to a SQL that you can bring SharePoint data into. Power BI, love Power BI, but definitely an advanced option and likely an expensive one if they're going to be hosting it. And lots of other enterprise BI solutions will work with SharePoint. A very common one like Tableau is a little bit iffy. It's not officially supported. There are ways that you can do it, and that's true for a lot of these other enterprise solutions. So I've focused on Microsoft for SSRS and Power BI, but if you are using something like Lumira or again Tableau, like it can be done, but it's not something that you're going to be able to stand up in an afternoon, most likely. So what are you going to do, right? You've kind of ran through all of these options, and you want something a little bit more sophisticated than a SharePoint list view, but maybe as a bear, you're out in the middle of the stream, you don't have anyone else to ask, nobody knows JavaScript, and there's just no way somebody's going to set up a SQL reporting services solution for you or for you to get training on it. And it's like, well, can't I just use Excel? Because Excel is exactly what I want. It's the world's most popular BI solution and probably forever will be. It's our favorite database tool. It does everything, but it kind of goes against everything I know with SharePoint because I'm in this collaborative space. I'm sharing information, but I also need a way to be able to share my analytics. And if I just put it in a file, I feel like that's defeating the purpose. But you can be happy, do a little bear happy dance because there are ways that we can use Excel and all of the beautiful, wonderful things about Excel, and also do away with some of the not so nice stuff about Excel, about how it is a file, and be able to be more collaborative about it. So we'll leave the dancing bears for now, and we'll go and take a look at what it is that they've set up in terms of their fish tracking site and look at how we can do some analytics. So I have a list, the bears have a list in their SharePoint site where they've come in every month, they've kept track of their catches and added them to the SharePoint list. So we have some different locations, we have some different bears, and we're going to look at some information about these different bears. So for each bear, I have just kind of close this up. I have 3 different bears, and for each bear, I've got the date, the location, and total food. So this is like a summary view for each of the bears. That's going to add up additional information, which is this by bear table. So this is where I'm using SharePoint views to be able to provide some insights into this information. So now I have groupings. I can see the bear name. I can see the location, and then using SharePoint, I'm able to add these up. Pretty limited in what I can do. I can do sums, I can do averages, and that's about it. I'm also limited to having just 2 levels. So if I wanted to do, for example, by a bear, by location, by month, that wouldn't be an option, at least not strictly out of the box, because SharePoint limits me to having 2 levels. So the bears have gotten this far. It's definitely helpful. I can see whether I'm catching more salmon or more trout. It looks like Hoop is doing pretty well with the trout. And this can help me out. And again, I have my totals by bear. So I have a calculated column, which is total food. That's going to add up the salmon, trout, honey, and picnic counts. And I can see that over here. Now the trouble with this information is I can't aggregate it. SharePoint will not let me aggregate calculated columns. So pretty quickly, this is becoming a solution that's just not going to be very helpful for me beyond anything I could do by just pulling out a calculator. Now, I may know that SharePoint is going to allow me to export information to Excel so I could do further analysis on it. And that's exactly what I want to do right now. So let's take a look at that option. By the way, I am on Office 365. I am using the classic view, not the new view. So your layout may be a bit different if that's what you're familiar with, but I can't seem to let this one go, especially with the things like totals, which just aren't available in the new view. It's more important to me that I see this information here. So when I go up to the list up here on the ribbon, I have this option to export to Excel. Now, before I click that, I want to mention what it is that this button actually does, and I think it's very important. It's linked to the list, but export to Excel is actually linked to the page. So when you create a view in SharePoint, this was kind of revolutionary to me when I found it out. Perhaps this is something you've known all along, but when you create a view in SharePoint, you are creating a unique URL. So if you look here, I have totals by bear.aspx, and this would be all items.aspx if I were to click on this. Whatever information is on the page is what is going to be exported when you bring it to Excel. So if you aren't displaying all of the fields, you're not going to see all of it in Excel. When you do a grouping, that is not considered information that's included in Excel. So I would recommend that you start with a view like all items, or you may want to come up with something called reporting view that has all of your data. And don't worry about sorting it or grouping it or anything, just plain data, because we're going to let Excel do some of that work for us. So now I have a view that's just every bear, every date, every location, and all of their catches, just the raw data set, and this is what I want to export to Excel. Now, you might find chances that you want to filter some of the information out based on sensitivity or for other reasons, or maybe it's archived, right? You don't want to bring information in that's more than 2 years old, for example. But in this case, I'm just going to bring everything. So now that I'm in the right view, I have everything. I have my raw data set. I'm going to go up to Lists and click Export to Excel. Now, it's telling me down here if I want to save this IQY file. It's not immediately exporting the data. What this is doing is creating a connection file on my desktop in my temporary files folder for the moment that will maintain a feed to this list. And that's really important because this isn't like a once-off export that I can just do and then I close the file and it's gone. The file is the feed. The file is actually just a tunnel that will be able to refresh the data from the source. That the mechanism for opening this file is Excel. So that's a key part of this. I don't know exactly what it stands for, something with query, but this is what is going to open in Excel and actually what it is I'm going to modify, not Excel itself. For now, I'm just going to click Open, and this will open up Excel. Here you can see it knows that it's going to open up a data connection. It's not just saying I'm connecting to the internet and bringing in data. It's saying, hey, do you want me to run this data connection? Are you sure? So we're going to enable that. Likely something you want to set up as a trusted file so that you don't need to do this every time. But now I've done this, I've got my data, and you can see it's appended some extra fields over here in K and L. So at this point, there are 4 things that you want to do every single time if you plan on reusing this. The first thing is to save the file. Save the file somewhere. It can, for the moment, be on your desktop. You just don't want to be losing the work that you're going to do in the next couple of steps. All right, the next thing you want to do is rename the tab because query doesn't mean anything. So we're going to call this maybe catches by bear. All right. That one's done. The next thing is to notice that this information has come in an Excel table. If you're not familiar with Excel tables, it seems kind of redundant, right? Isn't Excel just a giant table? But it does give you some capabilities of being able to auto-calculate or format or other ways of manipulating or referencing the data. So when you bring information in this IQY, it automatically converts it into a table. And you'll know that because up here you've got a ribbon, special ribbon, that says Table Tools. You wouldn't see that if I clicked over here, for example. Now it's gone. So we'll go back into the table, go up to Table Tools, and every table has a name. You'll want to rename this table, not to Table Query, because this isn't a table query. This is a table of information that we want to be able to reference. And this, unlike my tab name, can't have spaces in it. I want to keep it short, so I'll just call this Catches. And let me just pin this here so we can continue to see it. All right, now the third thing you want to do is go up to your Data tab and come here to this link that says Connections. This is where that IQY file is. The IQY file, if you remember when I opened it, it said, do you want to open query.iqy? This is why I see a query here. This is the name of the IQY file. If you're going to open multiple IQY files, query 1, query 2, query 3, query 4 are not going to mean anything. And this is also where you can configure the settings of the IQY file. So the last thing you want to do, out of the 4 things you want to do initially, is to rename this. So we'll go in here into Properties, and we're going to rename this, let's say, Bear Catches. Now, I probably would want to name these all the same thing, unlike what I just did. But we'll just leave this here. Last refresh. So you can enable background refresh if you want. I'm just going to leave that turned off. But I do like this one, refresh data when opening the file, because that means whoever's going to open this, if they forget, they can't forget because it will just refresh every time. So that looks good. Bear Catches. Now I know what this information is referring to when I open this up in the file. All right. At this point, I can start to do some data manipulation on this if I wanted. I can come in here, let's say I don't care about this and I want to delete it. At this point, I come up here to refresh. It says refresh all, refresh. I can get to my connection properties here, but I can refresh, and it did refresh. I didn't have any new data, but it did not bring back these files, these fields, K and L. It's going to refresh where I have information and update this sheet, but it's not going to change anything that I've done. It will preserve my layout. So I have a column here for total food. Let's create one for total weight, which I did not put in my SharePoint site. So for the total weight, I want to add up the salmon weight and I guess just the trout rate here, trout weight. Why didn't it like that? Oh, I didn't put a plus sign. Yes. There we go. Now I've got total weight. And again, I can refresh and it preserves it. So as long as I have this file, I can bring in the data, I can add it up, and it won't interfere with any of the additional analytics that I've done. So pretty cool. Now, I have more information in my site. So this is great. I'm able to look at this one list, but how am I able to have something more robust? I want to bring in more information. Let's go back to the bear site. Here's our information for each bear in terms of their catches, but the bears have also been keeping some statistics, like how many attempts they've made on catching fish, how long they were at each location, how many fails they had, right? They saw a picnic and everybody ran away before they had a chance to steal their sandwiches. We also want to incorporate this information into our Excel. I'm going to go through the same process a little bit quickly this time. I'm going to go into this list, export to Excel. Here it is, query.iqy, open, enable. This is the ticket. Be very careful not to click OK here, which is I've done many times, just instinct. Okay, yes, I always agree to everything. Pause for a moment when you get this screen because you are getting an option to add it to a new worksheet and not a new workbook. That's the option that I want to pick. We'll say OK. And you'll see it brings the information into the same workbook that I just had. So now I have 2 data sources in my one workbook, and I can go through those same steps again. In this case, bear stats. I'll be better on my conventions this time. Here's my table name, bear stats, and data, connections, query. It's important that you do these steps now because if you start to reference these tabs in pivot tables and other reports, if you change these, it will break everything. So get into a habit, coming in, start everything up the first time, even if you end up not using it, because you'll regret it later when you've spent hours, if not days, getting everything exactly the way you need it, and then you find out you have to rename it, and you can never get it back again. So this is Bear Stats. All right, and that's pretty much all there is to it. I can bring in as many different data sources as I need into a single workbook, and then I can do with this workbook what I like. So I have Julia Child style, something a little bit more sophisticated than the bears, no offense bears, coming over here to the Protiviti Risk Index site. Perhaps you saw some marketing material on this. I'm not going to go into what it's about, but we do have a cool feature based on what I've just showed you. So we have all this information about metrics and metrics for business units and how they're organized by different types of risks, and just a wealth of stuff that people might want to look through. And that we don't really have a BI solution built into this. Part of the risk index is that you can apply whatever BI tool you have. But as a lightweight solution, we take all the information that's in the risk index and add it to this link called data export. So if I open this up, I'm immediately brought to this pivot table. And you can see at the bottom of this pivot table, I have 4 tabs. I have an index, I have risk factors, I have the individual metrics. But focusing on this pivot table at the root, I can combine, as you can see here, all of these all of this data into whatever types of reports I wanted, charts that I wanted, pivot tables that I wanted. And this is actually a read-only copy that is posted in the site in the navigation. So I opened this from the site. I'm in the browser. I'm able to view this information. It's available to whoever wants it, and it is a single source of truth. So whoever needs to get this latest data every week, every month, doesn't need to go in and recreate the pivot table from scratch. It's already set up. It's got it exactly the way I want it. All people need to do is come in here and they can refresh, and they can access it from the home page over here. Let me go back to the page I was on. I've just linked to that file. Again, I'm going to hover over this. If you look at the URL, it is showing that it's a data export. And this is just a living file that I've done all this work for, got all the pivot tables set up, and I could even embed it in a site. Perhaps you've seen this before. And there are some options that are available to you to limit what people can see and how they access it. But I hope that gives you a good idea on how we can take information from disparate sites in SharePoint and pull it into Excel. So with that, I think we'll wrap up proper, and just thanks everybody for coming. Hope you learned something, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Thanks, Brittany. If you have any questions, please insert them in the question window. We did have a question about today's recording. Today's recording will be on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/ProtivitiSP. We have a question here. I noticed that when you exported the view to Excel, that SharePoint displayed the following message. Microsoft Office has identified a potential security concern. I understand that you can prevent this if you set up a trust relationship. How do you do that?
It often depends on your browser settings and on your settings within Excel. There's an option for your trust center. You can add the URL that those files are located in and all of their subsites in your trust center. But once you set up this, you won't get that message every time if you've enabled that in your trust center. So anybody who goes in can refresh without seeing that message. Alternatively, if you're more on the SharePoint administrator side and you know that there's going to be certain locations that are often used, you can set up these trusted locations at a higher level and say any data that's being pulled from such and such a site should always be trusted. It's pretty rare that I see that, but it is an option if you want to trust your own environment. You could talk to a SharePoint administrator about getting that configured.
Okay, great. If anyone has any other questions, please insert them in the question window. Wait a few more minutes. All right. With that, I will end today's webinar. Thank you, Brittany, for all the great information, and thank you all for attending today's webinar.
Thank you.
We will see you in 2 weeks. Have a great day, everyone.